Greetings, you happily miserable accursed. It's Hurley here with your ever-loving, ever-cussing political panel. Three people who I'm confident have never bought themselves a plane on Friday and then put it up on Private Jet Marketplace on Sunday. Fred Delory, Scott Reed, and Jordan Lightness are here. Scott and I are very excited about last night's hockey game, as you can tell.
We are.
You went full jersey, Scott. I just went a t-shirt. You went full jersey.
No, I went full jersey because I think we have to do our part, David. We have to lean in. We have to put both shoulders behind this wheel. And, you know, the boys in Tampa, overtime, Slavko, half an hour before the game, Feshchuk sends me a note going, how do you think you guys are going to do? I think you're in tight, your team. I was like, Slavko's going to be big. And then Slavko was big.
Unbelievable.
This underscores my great hockey expertise.
Yeah, you should take over the Leafs. They need some help.
I hear they're interviewing other blonde men. Yes. Why would they? Why? What? What is with this search for the Leafs? It's ridiculous. It sounds like amateur hour. Like Matt Sundin. Okay, great idea. Like, or they're just going to let's just go mine people who never won a cup here but were recognizable for 5-year stretches.
Well, they have such a great history of wise leadership and success. I'm not sure why they're breaking away from that.
Get a pure hockey GM.
It's really the ownership, man. It's really the ownership. You know, they charge those kids $1,000 to skate around with the flag at the beginning, like every single bit. We're going to talk about surveillance pricing.
It's the second time you've talked about this. It really bothers you. You have no children, and yet this drives you absolutely around the bend.
It drives me around the bend, but I read a thing this weekend where John Ferguson Jr. said that when he was the general manager, he said they were going to miss the playoffs, and he decided to tear the thing down. He was going to trade Sundin and trade a couple other people, Caberlet, get some picks. And the ownership said to him, well, you know, your budget included playoff games revenue. So he had to go out and buy a player in order to make the playoffs as opposed to tear it down. Ownership's a big problem. Anyway, Jordan, you're excited about something completely different. What the hell were you up to this week?
Yeah, I was like, I don't know, is there hockey that was happening? I wasn't here, guys, which dampens my already low level of enthusiasm for all things hockey.
You were doing something to do with Sanchez. How does that go again? Something Sanchez?
Yeah, something.
Sanchez.
I was in Spain for this big progressive summit that Sanchez put together, and President Lula from Brazil was there, a whole bunch of other leaders. Quite the crowd event, guys. They know how to do it up in Europe. They had 5,000 people out there for this thing.
What was it?
So it was a big international conference that Sanchez had put
got
together.
at 8 at 11 p.m.
Yeah,
is that it?
Obviously. So you see, if enough of us come together and we drink enough wine in enough bars in Barcelona, we can solve all the problems of social democracy. No, it was. This is like a bit of a left flank anti-Trump coalition that Sanchez is putting together internationally, and it was fascinating. And I think in particular in Europe right now, there's a real realization, of course, that the left has to provide a better alternative to rising authoritarianism. So Orban's loss in Hungary has been seen as just like a watershed moment there. So there was a bit of wind in the sails of this group of folks coming into this event. And it was very interesting. They had a big U.S. Democratic Party participation from all flanks. So you had like videos from Hillary Clinton. You had Tim Walz was there speaking, and Mamdani sent something in. And so just an attempt to connect some of the anti-Trump stuff that's happening to a broader center-left agenda and left agenda globally. So it was really interesting.
I actually had a very similar weekend to you, Jordan. I forced my 4 kids to watch WrestleMania with me Saturday and Sunday night.
There you go.
It was, I think it was
100% less red flag waving, but similar, I'm sure.
When WrestleMania becomes an anti-Trump coalition, you know that his numbers are in trouble, right?
There's a lot of Catholics in WrestleMania, aren't there?
A lot of what?
A lot of Catholics. A lot of
They're everywhere, man. Catholics? They're crawling all over the place.
Catholics are anti-Trump. Now I was just thinking Catholics and wrestling and, anti-Trump coalitions.
Well, they're everywhere. Hopefully you can find enough in the U.S. vote base.
What were you doing at WrestleMania?
No, I was watching WrestleMania at home with my kids. I didn't spend $50,000 to take my whole troop of children to it.
Okay, right. And who won?
Well, there was a lot of matches, but
They don't have
I'm
they don't
saving
have a
one for my
winner.
Hey You.
I never
I'm
watched.
saving.
Listen, David's a little outdated. Andre the Giant, the Iron Sheik, Jake the Snake. Who won?
Yeah. Well, look, I'm going to save.
Did somebody put
my
a sleeper
Hey You.
hold on somebody? That's what I want to know.
My Hey
Whipper
You
Billy
took one.
Watson off the second rope.
There's really no danger that anybody's going to learn about kettlebells on this podcast, is there?
No, not at all. All right, so that's a rundown today. We're going to talk about Ford's Jet. We're going to talk about Avi Lewis on the cost of living and a video on surveillance pricing. Speaking of videos, Mark Carney put out a 10-minute short film called Forward Guidance. That's our cursed clipping today. And then Poilievre's messaging pivots from the last pivot. We'll talk about what is going on there. So, and after all of that, of course, the immortal Mr. Pinsent restores some sanity with our Hey Yous. So let's start just seriously with the Ford plane. Scott, take a free run at this. Is this just him on the loose? Because I think a lot of people made the point that, they're a late term government. People are looking for these kinds of things, and there could hardly be anything more off brand for him than this. And it's been a carefully constructed brand.
Well, I think I only have one comment on that, and it's that one, which is the obvious one, which is that Ford has, despite the checkered political past when he was at City Hall, despite all the suggestions that arose during his suggestions and doubts that rose during his first year in office, right? He has created this brand that has widened his coalition, that has made him very invulnerable to criticism, hard guy to attack, and he has cultivated and nurtured that brand with staggering discipline over the course of the past number of years. The paid media, his very careful interventions. He shows up at the legislature once every time there are 2 moons in the sky. He's very, very, very disciplined. And for the past 3, 4, 5 months, he's been all over the highway, like he's swigging from a Mickey and driving with his toes. And so this plane thing to me is the epitome of it. And it is directly off brand. There are clips of him from 2019 saying how he will not ride on the King Air airplane that is available to the premier and all this sort of stuff. That was the Ford brand, even if it was cartoonish. And I'm usually the guy to defend some politician for taking a $30 charge on a glass of beer in Munich or whatever. But this is so off brand, and obviously they said, okay, we have no choice. We have to do a full-fledged retreat on this thing, and in breakneck time. And I think the real question is, what's going on here? I know lots of people, it's going to sound self-serving because he's our friend and he was on the pod until he took a leave, right? But some people are saying, well, it's Corey's absence behind this. Other people are saying there have been changes and migrations in the office. Maybe it's those things. Maybe it's all those things. Maybe he needs those louder voices around him. But he looks to me like a guy who's grown comfortable being premier, who's decided that the idea that pops into his head is the idea that he will pursue. There's this famous story that people told about David Peterson, some of his staffers, when he was preparing to call the election in 1990. And he, people were trying to warn him and stuff. And I love David, so I'm not trying to slag him, but I'm just using this as an example. And he said, you know what, just leave it with the old premier. And, that's what happens sometimes. You get too settled into the office. If your polls are high and you've had a great run, you sometimes think, there isn't an arrow in the kingdom that can pierce my armor. And it's almost always the one that you shove right through the plate yourself. And that's what he's doing. So the question is, how vulnerable is he? Is he going to correct this? Is he going to take this as a lesson and go back to being disciplined? Or is there an opportunity for somebody out there to run and make him pay? Are we watching the beginning of a phenomenon that will be discussed 2 years from now as saying, well, and that's how Doug Ford lost office?
Cost of living has been at the top of the agenda for some time, regardless of political stripe, and for good reason. With international conflicts driving gas prices through the roof and other inflationary pressures, day-to-day costs for Canadians are skyrocketing. There's some rare good news on the affordability front, however. Frequent listeners will remember that for much of the last year, on behalf of our presenting sponsor TELUS, I told you about a petition before Cabinet that was attempting to overturn a CRTC decision to allow wholesale fiber internet access across Canada. You'll also recall Minister Joly dismissed that petition late last summer, allowing all telecom companies to compete in new markets, offer more customer choice, and ultimately better prices for Canadians. Because of that policy, TELUS was able to sell internet services in Eastern Canada for the first time, and the results are in. Since TELUS entered the market, home internet prices are down 17% in real terms in Ontario, according to the latest Statistics Canada data. What I wouldn't give for a 17% cut to my other bills. So the policy is working as designed, increasing competition with a measurable impact on Canadians' monthly expenses. If you feel you're still paying too much for home internet, I know the friendly people at TELUS would love to offer you a competitive plan. In their view, policies that improve competition are a no-brainer. But here's the thing. There are 3 more petitions before Cabinet right now to overturn the CRTC decision. So the fight to protect home internet competition isn't over. I'll tell you more about it next week. Jordan, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost inexplicable when you consider the way he's built his brand and the effort that's been put in to trying to construct him as somebody who's always motivated by helping the little guy, right? This is really that is like the gold of his brand. There's no conclusion that any reasonable person could come to on the Plain story other than that it was designed to make his life personally more comfortable, more luxurious. And it's complete anathema to how he's put his public character together. And I think that if you look at what's been happening over the last few weeks, the nut of the problem is that line that he gave, when he was asked about the Liberal leadership, is like, you can run Mickey Mouse against me. This is somebody who thinks that they are invulnerable to public criticism, that they can do no wrong. That's why they are dragging the access to information stuff on there. Despite the public outcry, they're going to continue to hide his information through this process. Weird legacy stuff like the Science Center, like taking over Billy Bishop Airport, although maybe now it all makes a little bit more sense. You take it over, you can land his personal jet there. So
build his own island.
There you go. Maybe he's just,
Fordland.
Fordland. Yeah. Maybe the Mickey Mouse analogy doesn't stop there. But like this stuff is all wacky shit, right? That doesn't in any way fit with the persona that he has cultivated that allowed him to have 8 years of success. I would argue this is also somebody who's overwhelmingly over that time faced a pretty weak and divided opposition. And I think maybe it's made him lazy. And I do also think that the nonsense has definitely increased in pace since Corey went out to BC. So I think that's probably, there's probably a causal observation there as well, that he's maybe not getting strong advice within his team to steer him away from some of his worst instincts on this stuff. But what you're seeing has just been a fire hose of news that has eroded his brand. And I think it could be very, very damaging to him. It's hard to see how, if he continues down this path, that there's going to be much left in terms of his approval in a year. He's gone from one poor, bad optics decision to another. And this one was really maybe just the most obvious and recent of them, but it's one in a series.
Yeah. Fred, what was your observation about it?
Well, look, I think there's 2 points that I think are ridiculous. One, that the Premier of Ontario does not have a plane. I think that's ridiculous. And I think it's ridiculous that Doug Ford then thought he should get one, though, because of his brand, because of who he has developed himself to be and how Ontarians view him. He is the guy who I would always expect to take economy and to be a man of the people. Back in 2018, for the people was his slogan then, and it worked incredibly well. As others have mentioned here, governments defeat themselves. And when you make these types of mistakes, and if they pile up, the brand changes, and it changes into something that you can't control anymore. So you can control it as long as you're disciplined and focused and remember what it is and what your narrative is. And it's a great reminder that it's incredibly important to stay true to that. And when you do shift it, and when you're in office for a long time, it's easy for that to happen. Different issues come up. And go back to Ford from 2018 to now. For 8 years, he's been premier. Still very high numbers, and I would say, win another election right now if we were to go right this spring. But 8 years is a long time, and you do collect enemies, you collect issues over that period. So you got to be very cautious in how you manage all this stuff and be very, very mindful of it. And when you take your eye off of that, that's where the risks come in, and that's where you can be defeated.
Yeah.
Can I?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sure. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to add two things. The passage of time, this is something maybe that people who haven't done jobs like ours don't know, but the passage of time also has a really kind of natural and organic effect as well, right, for leaders. So, we talk about Corey's absence or whatever, but the passage of time means that even the people that were there find it harder and harder. It's not like the early days when you're all like trying to overcome the other guys, win power, seize power, manage it, demonstrate that you have an effective agenda, right? Everybody's sharp and on top of things. And the more the time passes, the harder it is to work up the energy to stand on the premier's desk and yell at the premier and say, no, 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 no. Put the goddamn phone down. I'm telling you, no, this is wrong. It's harder for the advisors, even if they're the same ones. And certainly if they're ones who came in later, they don't have necessarily that forged in fire relationship. They might feel a little less, a little less senior is too condescending. I don't want to say that. You don't know what those dynamics are.
But they don't have
But
the
they
same
work
relationship
there.
with him.
They may not have the same relationship. They may not have a relationship that originated in a time when that person, that principal, needed advice, received and invited advice. Maybe now they're a little more comfortable in their position of authority, so it's a bit more workmanlike. So, and it's just harder to work up the energy to hop on the desk to say no. The leader is less interested in being told no. They definitely get that way. The walls come in a bit. So there's all those effects happen. The last thing I want to say about this, though, there was something I loved about this whole event. The statement. I love the statement issued by the Premier's office. By the way, not bad. If you're going to do this thing, do it on Sunday morning, right? Then you catch a break because the Prime Minister releases a YouTube video that you didn't have any idea was coming, so that helped a little.
Must have been
But
a
do it
brutal
on
Saturday, though, eh? Must have been a
painful Saturday at Mum's house out there in Etobicoke. There was some aides getting thrown around like rag dolls, right? I'm not doing this or fuck that. They would have been ugly. Would have been a lot of blood and shoelaces left on the ground. But the statement begins with these words. Despite the best of intentions.
Yeah, no, eh?
I love, despite the best of intentions. Listen, God knows I was guided in my decision to buy this jet by the purest and most noble of motives. I was thinking, how in these times of toughness, how in these times of hardship, do I do something that will benefit the ragged wearing, downtrodden orphans of Ontario? And I thought, I'm going to buy this plane. So notwithstanding how pure my intent was, I have decided reluctantly to surrender this plane for $4 million less than I paid for it.
So, people sometimes speculate that Doug Ford will not be the candidate in the next election for the Conservatives. Sometimes people think maybe he's got federal ambitions. Sometimes people think he may just go. But you wouldn't buy this plane if you didn't think you were going to be around for a while longer, right?
I don't know. I think if you do something like this, you're just too fucking comfortable. Like that's the nut of it.
I think there's a real possibility that he does run again in 3 or 4 years' time, whenever the next election comes.
Yeah.
I would not discount him going again. I think he really loves being Premier of Ontario. I don't think he has the ambition, the true ambition, or all the, we see all the rumors that he'll go federal at some point. I don't think he'll be doing that. Why not stay as Premier if you're really enjoying the job and if you can get reelected?
I think actually, David, I would be more inclined if it was nearing the end of the term and he made this decision. I'll almost be inclined to say he's decided he's not running again. He'll take one for the team. Fuck it. He doesn't care. He's willing to.
Right.
And then the team actually gets angry. You're like, that's great. You're going to retire and leave us with this legacy of this decision. But I don't think that's a dynamic in this decision. I think he just made this decision because he wanted to. And I think the timing is driven by, well, I'm not going to face the electorate for 2 years or so. So what the hell, I can take this if it's a bit of a bruise. And no one said to him, or at least he was unwilling to listen to those who said to him, this is so off-brand, you can't do it.
Right.
It's that point final. It's just that simple. But I think he's going to run again because, to be honest with you, forget all the things about these people never leave these jobs willingly. But like he does have a chance to really make history. He could win 4 majority terms in a row if he were to win the next election outright, and that would put him in the history books and would be a stellar accomplishment, to be blunt, right? Like it would be really something significant, especially in this day and age where people say once you hit 8-9 years, we've had our fill of you.
Yeah.
And so I think he's going to run again. I think he wants to chisel his name in stone.
Yeah, I think he certainly wants to chisel his name in stone. But if you look at the amount of own goals he's sustained just this spring alone, they're really going to have to change direction if that's the plan.
All right, some business. Prime Minister Carney has begun announcing the groundbreaking of several major projects across the country. This is a big deal. These projects are precisely what Canada must continue to do: diversification, expansion, smart investment. They will expand Canada's maritime port capacities, strengthen Canadian supply chains, and create thousands of jobs. They will create new opportunities for Canadian products and will benefit Canadian businesses and consumers. Our sponsor, CN, watches these announcements with great satisfaction. As they consider the task ahead, CN's railroaders murmur a few words in railroad language. I've talked about that here before. English is littered with terms that originated in railways: light at the end of the tunnel, whistle stop, on track, blowing your stack, double header, sidetrack, making the grade, gravy train. I could cite dozens more. But there is also a more technical railroad language, terms that are top of mind for CN as it considers supply chain expansion. Through speed is the average speed of a rail car from origin to destination. Car velocity is the average number of miles per day a rail car travels. Through dwell is the average time a rail car stays put at the terminal before it gets going again. And gross ton miles is the movement of 1 ton of cargo over a mile of track. CN's metrics are excellent and improving. They are published weekly on the CN website. The railway will help power these new vital projects. Canada's economy rides on CN rails. It's great to see the nation thinking big. Well, speaking of it, Ford's dulling political instincts, I think he showed them also on our next topic, which is we're going to talk about Avi Lewis and his outing on surveillance pricing. And Ford was asked about this, whether he was interested in blocking this kind of activity. He just gave it a blanket no. Like not a, it's disturbing, we got to protect consumers, no verbiage around that, just a no, I couldn't care less about it. And I think that that's another sign that his populist instincts are dulling, because I think this is a pretty good issue. That's the reason I raised it, Fred. What do you think about this? I mean, I think this is a kind of thing people can understand and get angry about.
Yeah, and I think anytime you can tie something to the rising costs that we're all facing, it's a political win. I don't even quite understand what the issue is or what it is that Abby's saying is the problem, but the fact he's talking about a problem that needs to be fixed, even as abstract as it may sound, is a political win for him, and it gets him into the conversation on this stuff. So it absolutely makes sense from a pure populist sense to be out championing these sorts of things.
Yeah, so this is sounds to me, Jordan, like this is a piece of advice that Wab Canoe gave him right out of the gate. Like, get on this issue, because Wab had already been on it, and Wab probably said, this is you got to look like you're on the side of the average person here. This is a good issue for you, and out they go.
Yeah, I think, and it's super solid advice. I love this as a first issue for Avi to go out on. I think they chose it very well and they executed it well, and they got actually like a phenomenal week of coverage, like a week of coverage on this topic. Which shows that he was really able to punch through in a way that we haven't seen the NDP successfully do federally for well over a year now. And I think this issue works for 3 reasons. So the first is, obviously, this is in the affordability basket. This is something directly to do with the bills people are paying, with grocery shopping, with things that are very like relatable. And it's something that's immediately in that basket that people understand as urgent because they're dealing with it every day. The second reason I think it works is because it crosses over into sort of that big tech and AI issue set that we know Canadians are incredibly anxious about. So, this is, I think, also another area where the Carney government has really not thoroughly understood or taken in public opinion on this, because you have Minister Solomon out there going out and talking about AI almost uniquely as an innovation agenda item, not as something that necessarily that needs to be regulated or that consumers or workers need to be protected from. But most Canadians really understand it as an issue that's pretty scary for them. It's scary for them in the workplace, and it's scary for them in terms of the potential manipulation that companies can do around private data and consumer issues. And so this is a really good example of that. And maybe just to answer your question, Scott, in terms of what is it? It's basically like if you're shopping for something, particularly online these days, you might be like I might be shown a different price than you based on the personal data and the consumer history that a website or a company has about you. And like most people just think that's pretty fucked up, right? Because it's taking a lot of personal information about you and then using it to kind of manipulate prices in a way that can cost people more. So I think it's absolutely right in terms of that intersection of that tech issue set and the worries that people have. And then the third reason that I love it is that it's anti-corporatist. It's anti-corporate. It's got a villain in a way that the Liberals can never talk about these issues because they can't go after the companies the way the NDP can. So this is like, in my mind, some of the best left-leaning populism that Lewis and the NDP could be engaging in because it's correctly assigning an enemy in terms of the public fight around affordability. Prices aren't just rising because of supply and demand. Prices are rising because companies are trying to profit off of this chaos. They're trying to profit off of your personal data. And for most Canadians, I think that that's a pretty especially outrageous concept right now. So for all those reasons, I think it was really successful in terms of breaking through as well because it was newer. It was a fresher idea. It's something that's not being discussed right now in any of those affordability or tech discussions that are happening in Ottawa. And I think it's great that he's out there, he's talking about that issue, and he's having that assigned to the NDP as a space that is really unique to them.
So, Scott, if you say to people that companies are trying to not just offer you a product at a fair price, but to extract the maximum amount of money out of you that they possibly can, people will nod their head and say, yeah, that's how business behaves. That's what people think about business these days. But this feels to me, and I'm just riffing off of Jordan's last point, it seems to me like the latest in something that actually has been going on for a few years now. Now, maybe Lewis will be more successful at this. But in the race for populism and in the race for working class voters, the Conservatives have been saying, blame the government. If you're unhappy with your life, blame the government. And the NDP, under Singh and now with this policy, are saying, if you're unhappy with your life, blame corporations. It's the same as on the rising gas prices. The NDP position was, you shouldn't cut the tax. You should tax the corporations. So do you think the NDP can successfully make corporate world the villain of the affordability crisis?
Well, I think they actually have had two targets, two villains here. One is the corporations, but then also the politician who's willing to fight with them in public and then amplify the controversy, generate more media, and bring the issue into clearer focus for Canadians. So Avi Lewis got lucky and won that because, as we were saying, Ford engaged him. And I wonder if that's also a model. I'll come back to the corporate aspect in a second, but I thought it was, as a matter of tactic, I wonder if it either hints at a strategy or it might be seized upon and developed into a strategy. So rather than attack Mark Carney, who's at 68% in approval ratings, I mean, they'll always sort of do the drive-by and all that sort of stuff on him and hit the questions. Is it more fertile territory in terms of growing yourself from the seedling you are right now for the NDP? Is it more fertile territory politically to pick a fight with a conservative leader out there somewhere? So a Doug Ford or a Scott Moe, obviously Pierre Poilievre. Maybe that's more fertile ground in terms of chopping, particularly if you think they are going to dismiss your potentially popular sounding proposal as ridiculous and stupid. And then you get that confrontation, which drives media, which drives people paying attention. People are looking at their phones about it and all that sort of stuff. So I think he got lucky. I think it was Ford's bad instincts. I think when Ford said no, then he conflated it with the public groceries thing. Then he's inexplicably on television saying, we need to thank the Westons, by God. Like, I don't know. Like, I mean, why don't you send a fruit basket to Avi Lewis?
No less. On Gravy Plain Week. It's perfect.
It was mind-boggling. So you do wonder, like, has he fallen and hit his head? I mean, imagine this is a guy who branded the head of Hydro One as a $6 million man, and now he's like saying, like, let's thank the Westons. The other thing, though, going back to the corporate thing, is I think it all lies in the example. Because if it's expressed the way you did, David, then I think people kind of shrug their shoulders and they say, I might hate it, but I've had to live with it. It's like fighting the atmosphere. It's like fighting gravity. It is what it is. But when you say, and I've heard him sort of capture this a couple times, when you say to people, you know what, the second you go online, David Hurley, and you Google weed and gummies, well, then the algorithm tells me that you have a craving and desire for gummies. That means you're willing to pay more. Therefore, I will jack the price up. This is no longer a free market. We have figured out a way to determine what market you constitute as an island unto yourself, and we are going to fucking strip mine you. And so the things that you express interest in drive the amount that we will make you pay higher and higher and higher. I think when you lay that out, then people say, wait a second, you've gotten together with the tech bros, the likes of Elon, and you are fucking me coming and going. And when I Google for necessities or the things I want, I get euchred on price. That is not cool. And so if you can unlock the right example and expression of it, even if what I said is not, I'm sure there will be people who will correct me and go, empirically, that's not exactly how it works and all, whatever the hell. But if Avi Lewis or anybody else can capture that sense that rises above just the general, yeah, we all get ground into chalk by the market, into something more specific, that there is a brand new, specific, intentional thing that fucks you hard, then I think you could find mileage with that. So he gets, and then if he could get a conservative politician to argue with him about it, all the better.
Any moment now, some kind of clarity is expected on negotiations between the feds and Alberta on their MOU. Much of the focus there has been about pipelines or industrial carbon pricing. But there's another issue, in the view of our sponsor, the Canadian Climate Institute, that's flown under the radar: how it impacts federal clean electricity regulations. Here's a quick primer. The regulations apply limits to emissions from fossil fuel power starting in 2035. Those limits will be tightened over time until the sector reaches carbon neutrality by 2050. The regs are flexible, meaning they give power producers different ways to comply, and they're agnostic on technology. They don't dictate what kinds of technologies producers need to use. Right now, the regulations are in place across the country except Alberta, because the MOU suspended them until a final agreement is reached. Whatever that unique agreement looks like, the outcome on electricity needs to deliver the same emissions results as the clean electricity regs. Why? Well, it's a common requirement for federal provincial climate policies. And as you've heard in this space many times now, electrification is the future. According to the Institute, it's the only reasonable, cost-effective way to meet Canada's climate goals. So we need a lot more clean power, and the regulations make sure our electricity gets cleaner and cleaner over time. By the way, that's good news for air quality and our health, as well as the climate. But the pressure point is this: unless the system is applied equally across all provinces and territories, our climate goals are at risk from provincial backsliding and the increased demand of data centers and industrial projects. More at climateinstitute.ca. Fred, you're nodding your head through that.
Yeah, no, it's exactly it. With the affordability crisis, if you can have a policy to show that you have something to combat, whether it's true or not, if you have that, it's just really good politics, and you can go out and champion it. And to Scott's point, if you have people arguing it, even better for you. So it gives Avi something. It's hard to burst into the scene like this, particularly where his party is, and of course they're attacking corporations. His party believes in bigger and more government. The government is the solution for the NDP, never the problem. So it makes sense what he's doing politically, and it's going to be really interesting to see how this all plays out, and if he can stay on it and build some kind of momentum on this issue.
What does Carney do? Does Carney look at this and go, you know what, this issue has combustible power. Do I take it away from Avi before he gets to own it himself? Do I say that we're doing a study? Do I introduce some measures? Do I call together CEOs and say I want to ring fence these habits in some way? I mean, you get into the technical operations. I'm sure there's a million bureaucrats lined up around the corner to tell them, well, you can't do this and you can't do that. But I wonder if the government is watching this and saying, at some point, maybe sooner rather than later, we're going to have to decide how we steal this thing from them.
Yeah,
I really personally dislike the notion that there isn't a price for something. right?
Well, it's not
why-
supply and demand, right? It's manipulative based on the data that's been gathered about you. And I think Canadians find that to be shitty and unfair, right? Like that goes well beyond just corporations making profit. That's like this unholy marriage of the tech bros and the corporations, exactly as Scott said, strip mining people for every cent that they might potentially part with. And I think that this government has already missed an opportunity on big tech regulation. You know, we talked a little bit about the moment that happened after Tumblr Ridge, where they, for example, could have gone after generative AI companies in terms of, fencing some of that technology away from kids and harmful behavior. And like they haven't gone there. So we saw them a little bit tiptoe into that at the Liberal Convention, where they're talking about social media and young people. But again, like the government hasn't really, like they're really tiptoeing into this. So I think some of these opportunities are passing them by, and they are going to get seized on by other parties who recognize.
I think Solomon has an AI.
issue.
I think Solomon has an AI strategy coming out in a couple of weeks, so we'll see.
Yeah, well, it's great. I'm sure all
But
the
is
tech
this-
companies have been gathered around and asked very politely to regulate themselves, and that is just not where people are at on this stuff.
But we don't know what that AI strategy is about. How do we attract data center and sovereign data here, or how do we facilitate this industry, or is it about guardrails, or both? And if it is guardrails, does it extend to this kind of retail action? I know this. I know that just because I need 24-hour underpants, I shouldn't have to pay twice as much for them as Jordan just because she doesn't. In fact, it seems to me I should, as the more active consumer, get some kind of bulk discount. And that's what's turned up on its ear about this issue.
Right. Jordan, what's your theory as to why generally, though, the attacks on corporations don't take off the way the attacks on government does?
Well, I think that generally the political right around the world has been quite successful in delegitimizing government as an institution, and a lot of voters now buy into that. So the ground is primed for it, I think, in a way. Sometimes it can be a little bit more difficult to make the case around corporate profit being a motivator for bad behavior among companies. But I think that we're seeing, certainly as part of a global shift towards more polarization and more populism more generally. We talk a lot about this. The divide is no longer right and left. It's elite populist, right? So this all falls into that category. And I do think that people see nowadays, again, because of the involvement of big tech, just more and more examples of the way that the idea of like individual consumer power as a counterbalance to corporations' power is just no longer working. Like the scales have been broken. For example, like surveillance pricing, like how do you counter that as an individual consumer? There's really nothing you can do. If a company's engaging in that practice, they're not going to announce it to you. You can't necessarily comparison shop your way out of that, right? So I think that some of these practices have become just so greedy and so obscene on the face of it in terms of taking money from people on necessities, that the ground is really ripe to have some of those conversations. And so that's a positive thing for the left, I would say, more generally, because they can make that case. And there is a role for government in this, because those companies are not going to regulate themselves out of these practices. The government needs to have a role in that.
Right.
Can you make an argument that media is less independent? That, and I've worked in media, to be honest, just to answer my own question, I've never actually seen corporate leaders try to interfere with reportage, but you wonder, do people self-censor? Is it like with tech for the past 20 years and the establishment of tech, as soon as we got into the internet world, then we go mobile, and now we go AI, and these tech bros are huge and they're borderless and they're gigantic. It is something akin to the beginnings of the 20th century when you have this kind of mass of corporate power. And can you make the argument that they are more powerful than they were in the middle of the 20th century when you had checks and balances in terms of...
It's the borderless part of it, Scott.
Yeah.
It is the borderless part of it, which makes even regulators and policymakers feel that their hands are tied and they're hopeless. We can't even introduce a digital services tax because then the United States uses its surrogate power through trade talks to nullify that. I do think maybe it's a different world than it was 35 years ago.
Totally. And I think the idea that these things are too big to regulate is increasingly not being accepted by people when they see the harmful impacts in their lives, like be it around things like profiteering or around, social impacts of social media and things like this. Like, I think people are less willing to just buy the argument that these are just big unsolvable problems.
The following message is brought to you by Unsmoke Canada. Not all nicotine products carry the same risk. Smoke-free alternatives like heated tobacco, vaping products, and nicotine pouches don't burn tobacco or produce smoke. While not risk-free, evidence shows they have the potential to be significantly less harmful than cigarettes. Yet, Canadian regulations restrict access and limit communication about these alternatives, keeping adult smokers in the dark. Sweden has accepted this science, embraced smoking harm reduction, and driven smoking rates below 6%. Canada has the tools to do the same, but it requires political will. It's time to align regulation with science, expand access to smoke-free products, and empower Canadians to make informed choices. The evidence is clear. The opportunity is real. Canada can be smoke-free. Learn more at unsmoke.ca.
All right. So let's go to our clipping of the day, which is the Prime Minister's video released yesterday called Forward Guidance, based on his practice when he was Bank of Canada governor of giving forward guidance on interest rates. This is now forward guidance on where the country's going.
My previous jobs at the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England was part of my duties to make regular public reports on what we were doing to manage the economy. And I remember during the financial crisis, when there was a real risk of panic, I developed a practice called forward guidance. It was designed to assure people that however difficult the situation seemed on any given day, that we were acting, and importantly, that we would continue to act with overwhelming force against our problems until they were solved. The U.S. has fundamentally changed its approach to trade, raising its tariffs to levels last seen during the Great Depression. Many of our former strengths, based on our close ties to America, have become our weaknesses that we must correct. Workers in our industries most affected by U.S. tariffs, in autos, in steel, in lumber, are under threat. Businesses are holding back investments, restrained by the pall of uncertainty that's hanging over all of us. The U.S. has changed, and we must respond.
Okay. So before we get into the substance of it, let's talk about the method of it, the media, the way it was distributed. Fred, lead us off. What do you think about this tactic of a 10-minute video released on YouTube and then promoted on social? It's not requesting time on a network. It's not, and it's rather lengthy. It is fairly demanding of a viewer's time.
Yeah, look, it's adapting to new technology. It's a way to get your message out cleanly, unfiltered, without a nuisance journalist asking you tough questions. So it's a very clear strategy. And we know Mr. Carney doesn't do a lot of interviews, has done very few. But it's a good way to get your message out. It makes sense to do it this way, where you can sit down and map out exactly the message you want communicated. And it's not on just one network. You get it on YouTube that every single Canadian has access to, and that they can see it. Now, if the times were different, and if it was a Conservative Prime Minister, I know that people would be howling at the moon and would be talking about how unfair this was, or how ducking media, and how he's clearly trying to avoid scrutiny. But again, I wouldn't fault anyone for using this method for doing it. It is a way to get out there, and you get to tell your story and what you want. Now, I keep hearing the same speech, and we can get into the substance of it later, but it's not like we heard a lot new what was in this, but there is the importance of repeating your narrative over and over, and that's what they're doing here.
Yeah, I mean, it's not new to you or us, Fred, but do you think it's still new to the ordinary citizen out there?
It feels like the same message for the last year, just the words are changing slightly, but I didn't watch this and come away, okay, here's a new direction we're going. And not saying he has to, right? He has to reinforce his narrative. It is important to do that. Right. But the risk, of course, is when are we going to start delivering on your narrative?
Right. Scott, what do you think it accomplished?
Well, I think it broke through. Like, I'll just give you my experience with it. Yesterday morning, I'm farting around on a Sunday morning doing whatever, and all of a sudden CTV calls and says, Prime Minister's speaking, you're going to have to tail it. And like, there's a few minutes of like not quite sure what's going on, and I'm like, oh my god, this is. And I look on, and I'm checking my inbox because I subscribe to like media advisories, and like, no, there's no note from the Prime Minister's office that he's doing an event this morning or that he's issuing a statement or making a speech. So I was a little confused, and I'm like, what the hell is this? Is this an impromptu? So now I'm getting like, now I'm thinking to myself, gee whiz, like, is this an emergency declaration? Is something happening? Is he like decided he has to get up on Sunday morning and make a statement with respect to the state of Canada-U.S. negotiations? You had Lutnick shooting his mouth off like a fucking ape that he is. And so I'm wondering, like, is something going on that I'm not fully appreciating? And then I find out it's a YouTube video, right? So I think the answer is this broke through. Now, I'm not really a very good example of, but I think it's been done, right? It's not the TikTok videos that Trudeau did, but it is something more akin to the long form video explainer, and obviously we saw pre-campaign, we saw a lot of this from Poilievre, but I think as a piece of communications method, it's still not. I don't think we've seen a prime minister, at least in Canada, do this. A sit down, I'm going to talk to you straight to camera for 10 minutes. And it is very FDR, it's not a fireside chat, it's a screen side chat, that there's, so there are things I think it's interesting. He assures us at the end that this is something he will do again. Calling it forward guidance implies that there will be updates to guidance, and as a consequence, we'll hear more of them. Will they all resonate as much? I don't know, but this one broke through. And I thought it was unusual, and unusual makes it interesting and worth watching. There is both the approach and the execution, and we'll come to the message in a moment. I'll pause and I assume you want to talk about that later, but on the execution, I have some quibbles, and I'm not the only one who's saying that. Like, I think the edits were odd. I think if I was going to go to this effort, I wouldn't just stick them at what looked like a desk at a Staples where they, with a potted plant that may have been watered in the last 30 years, may not have been. Like, I think I do some shit around that. I thought the edits were odd. Like, it took me out of it if I was watching. So there's some stuff there, which I'm not expert in that shit. I'm just telling you, it broke my concentration. And if it's breaking my concentration, and if I'm noticing it, then, if I notice the actors acting, then, you're ruining the scene for me. So there's some of that.
We were just talking about elite versus populist. Yeah. And I mean, when you just think about the communication, the design of this thing. So he's in a suit, open neck, but
no tie,
no tie, but he's in a suit. He's in an office. He's in a chair. He's the prime minister. It's an elite message delivery mechanism.
Yeah. But that's his brand, and he doesn't want to. He can't show up in flip flops and a cigarette, right? So,
yeah, I do not want to see this guy in a hockey jersey ever.
No. What about the what about the walking and talking stuff that Poilievre used so effectively?
It's not Carney's brand, though, right? It's a very different brand. This is the statesman, the guy behind the table who doesn't get up often. He's sitting there working 24/7. That's what I expect in terms of the brand they built around him. So I wouldn't deviate from that. Now,
I also didn't think the walk and talk worked for Poilievre. I thought it was distracting.
The Carney, the editing of it was a bit off. There was some things there that seemed jilted, but that's, I don't think that's an elite versus populism thing, though, in terms of getting someone that can edit well.
No.
Yeah.
I disagree with you, Scott, on the Poilievre stuff. I remember him doing one in an airport I thought was fantastic.
Yeah. There were examples, but some of them really took me out of it.
But he was a fighter then, right? His narrative was a fighter that was trying to look, I'm working, I'm traveling the country, I'm shaking things up, I'm a disruptor. It's a different
and also,
narratives.
I think it's worth pointing out that the audiences that are increasingly leaning towards long form political video content are actually younger audiences. Like, it's not us. It's actually younger people who are the ones who are most engaging with this kind of content. And the cuts into other content, that's pretty common in that format. So actually, I didn't find it jarring, the cuts, maybe as much as you did, Scott. But I thought this was a good format overall for the Prime Minister. And I think it addresses one of the big problems that we've talked about certainly over the last few months, which is his tendency to kind of go into a black box and get really into the business of governing, but not into the business of telling Canadians what's happening through that process. So I would see this as a bit of a tool in the toolbox to help him storytell a little bit about what's happening. And what I was really struck by in terms of just the format was This was an attempt at storytelling, right, on his part in a way that we don't actually often see. You know, like the little statue of Isaac Brock, and like he's setting the current struggles with the U.S. into a larger historical narrative that, I don't know, whatever. It doesn't do it for me, but you know, clearly he's animated by it, and maybe that's enough. But more than anything, like even the setup of it, which I agree, it was a little, for me, it was a bit generic, actually, Scott. Like I thought it was just a generic office.
Yes, that's what I meant.
Like you needed
like
some
office.
like some pictures of his kids or something. Like you just needed a little more of his personality in it. But you'll notice what it wasn't, right? Like he wasn't in front of a podium. There wasn't a giant Canadian flag behind him. He wasn't wearing a tie. You know, it was generally a more relaxed, more leisurely, and there was a narrative thread through it, which we can quibble about the content of. But I think that this is also an attempt to address one of the things that, you know, hasn't necessarily happened. Like Carney's not loved, right? Like it's not like a lot of emotional connection between voters and him. And the understanding of what makes him tick and what animates him in this fight with the U.S. And
there
so
was
I think,
one woman at the convention. I
Yes.
didn't think she was going to let him go.
Well,
Jordan.
there you
I
go.
was-
But
right.
but I would say, you know, that might not be a representative sample. And so because I think he spent a lot of his professional career in contexts where his
That
communication
was Mona Forte, wasn't it?
his
Middle class
communication
prosperity.
is really, really strictly controlled, right? And it's intentionally a bit devoid of his personality. And so this is more of that. And they should be showing a bit more of him in this, I think, for it to really maximize that format. But overall, I liked it for him as a setup. I think that this is probably something that they should have been doing well before this, because they have an opportunity to get out a narrative, like not just a series of announcements, but an actual story about the process of things that are happening. And I think that they started down that path with this.
Ontario's need for clean, dependable energy is growing, and meeting that demand calls for bold action. The Bruce C project would add up to 4,800 megawatts to its existing site, making Bruce Power the largest nuclear generator in the world, with a total capacity of 12,000 megawatts. But this isn't just about energy security. It's about jobs, innovation, and prosperity. The project is expected to create and support about 20,000 jobs annually during design and construction, and thousands more for decades, contributing billions to Canada's economy. Learn how Bruce Power is building a stronger, cleaner future at brucepower.com. Fred, just one thing about the delivery I found was quite dour. Does it have to be so dour? I mean, he's got a mischievous side to him. He's got that wink. He's got some humor. He's got, and none of that was, I presume, very deliberately, none of that was on display. Is that inappropriate in that message? Or should he let his charm out of the box a little bit?
I think the charm is more authentic when it's at an event, when he's actually talking to people. When you're just talking into a camera, it's a little too fake, I would say, if you're trying to pull that off. At the same time, his message needs to be serious, right? Like he can't, like, this is an address to the nation.
That's
Things
what I'm
are going
asking, yeah.
potentially very, very bad. I think it'd be inappropriate to do that, to be too cute with it. At the same time, again, his narrative, the need to be careful. If things get really, really bad economically in this country, he can't be all sunshine and roses all the time. He has to set the mark and expectations of what's coming.
Right. So that's all been about the delivery, Fred. What did you think about the content? What did you think about what he had to say?
Well, again, as I said earlier, I've been hearing it for roughly a year now. It feels very similar. I know the words are different. I know what he said about the U.S. and the threat, and how the relationship is a threat to us. I think a lot of Canadians would agree with him on that. The reality is, though, they are our largest trading partner, and we need to be very cautious of that and make sure that we do work something out with them. But again, I think, he's given a lot of speeches. He's done a lot of things like this in terms of communicating his message. And this is where I think the Conservatives and the NDP, for that matter, need to just kind of bide their time and see, does he get things built? Do things get moving? And does he have a record to show come next election that he could actually succeed in everything that he said he was going to succeed in?
Yeah.
Is he going to bring $1 trillion of investment in? Because he's way off that so far. Obviously, we all hope he does make it by next election.
You know, Jordan, one of the things that's interesting to me that's so different from previous liberal leaders is his use of history. And, you know, on this podcast, I used to bemoan the fact that the Trudeau government was sort of abandoning the Liberal Party's historic relationship with the country's history, and was sort of breaking by being so critical and negative about the country's history. Was actually breaking something that had been a real strength for the party over the years. But Carney uses history differently than previous Liberal leaders before Justin used it. He talks about different things. I mean, first of all, he talks about building, which is very appropriate for the time. So St. Lawrence Seaway, things like that, we can do big things. I get why that works its way into the narrative. What's really interesting for me is his use of military history regularly in his talks to Canadians, because that is not historically part of the Liberal dialogue with Canadians. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, I was intrigued by it as well, because he also has like a particular affinity for British history as well, right? Like that's a really strong undercurrent whenever he is using these historical examples that he brings up. I mean, I would say it seems to me like it's a personal interest of his, which maybe is not surprising given the trajectory that brought him to the prime minister's office. But the other theme I think that he is using now is it's really like unity in the face of the American threat. That's like he is drawing on historical narratives through the War of 1812, so pre-Confederation, the idea that the country can unify and repel the American threat. So, I mean, I think that those stories have some more resonance today for sure. I don't know that they necessarily like those are very old parts of our history that don't generally make their way into public discourse in the same way. For example, you would see stories about Canada's participation in World War II, which would maybe be more familiar to Canadians as a touchstone of unity with allies in the face of a foreign threat. But clearly they're working for him. I don't know. As I said, it wasn't for me. It wasn't like I'm not the audience for that. It didn't do it for me, but I can certainly see that it helps provide a narrative framework for them to work with as they're trying to make the case that we can come together against this American threat. But I think to go to the content, I was really interested, the tone was more dour. The content was substantively similar to a lot of previous speeches we've seen from him, but the tone I thought was much, much more negative and more cautionary about the sacrifices and the challenges that are to come. So I wonder if we are seeing, particularly in the face of this energy crisis, and we can see that the ceasefire with Iran is not holding, and that this crisis may in fact be deepening. Is this part of a process where he's going to be conditioning Canadians to some more tough times ahead? And what that leads me to think about is the gap that this government has left in terms of communications about who is really bearing the brunt of those sacrifices and those threats. And I think that this is a place that they actually haven't communicated very well. They're able to talk about a string of affordability announcements, some of which now are going back well over a year. So sorry, guys, but I wouldn't expect a lot of payback from talking about your tax cut a year ago. But we're really seeing something deeper than that. Like, this isn't a problem that can be solved with just one-off tax breaks now at this point. We're seeing, for example, systemic disruption for young workers, high youth unemployment that's a combination, yes, of the uncertainty from the trade war, but also of the adoption of AI. We're seeing huge job losses in targeted sectors and the government not stepping in with the same urgency into those spaces. So I think that there remains a really big opening, particularly for the NDP, I think, to go after who is really being asked to bear the burden of some of the uncertainty and sacrifice he's talking about. And I didn't see that really addressed in this series of remarks.
Scott, just to indulge me for a second on my history thing before you get into what you want to say about the content thing. But, I don't know if Fred's having any deja vu about this, but the Prime Minister, it does remind me of Stephen Harper, who did talk about Canadian history a lot, right? Especially military history.
Yeah. I think there's a difference, though. I think that it is more purpose-built than you think. I agree with Jordan that he may be invoking some of these examples because he has a personal interest and it's available to him in terms of top of mind. But
Did miners
but
have
I
to
think
give him such a small statue? Is there not a larger statue of this famous
know,
Canadian? Like,
Do you think there's like an Isaac Brock
it's a
bobblehead
toy
somewhere?
soldier. He's
I-
supposed
Needs a
to be.
bobblehead.
I went online to McFarlane Toys, and while they do have an 18-inch Venom doll that you can move with 37 points of flexibility, the Isaac Brock doll, unfortunately, is in fewer. They have fewer models. I think there's a distinction. Very Isaac Brock. It's a small figure, but large shadow, David. It casts a shadow all the way to 2026. I think it's more strategic than we're necessarily giving it credit for, because I think, and it folds into something I was going to say. Like, I have 3 observations about the content of the message. Like Fred, I actually, when I was listening to it in real time, I thought, okay, well, the content of this, the message of it is familiar. But the more I thought about it, the more I want to qualify that. When he gets into and therefore we take control of what we can control, and that stuff's familiar. And then he runs through what the initiatives are and tries to give us a little bit of an update to imply momentum and so on and so forth. But I thought there were 3 things that were interesting about it that were intentionally either new or go further than they have before. So the first thing is, this is the sharpest articulation of difference he has made with the United States. Now, we had the Davos speech. He's talked about rupture. In the campaign, he said this relationship, as we know it, is over. But this was really stark, and he elaborated. It was said not in sentences, but in paragraphs. And he came back to it 2 or 3 times. And so he was really saying, look, folks, I am telling you as plainly as I can, and as uncomfortable though it may be to hear, this relationship is not going back. There is something fundamental that is altered. It will outlive Trump. He didn't say it that way explicitly, but that was clearly an implication, right? The nature of our relationship has undergone a shift that we cannot assume will return. And we therefore cannot responsibly govern on the basis that if 1 or 2 characteristics of this relationship right now alter, i.e. Trump, Republicans holding the White House, that it will snap back to normal. I mean, he really talked about it as though he didn't declare it like permanently busted and horror, but he suggested that its ability to return, the nostalgia line and emphasizing all of that. So that's thing number 1. And I think you invoke the military history and Isaac Brock. I mean, come on the nose, 1812. I mean, it was the reason he's employing those sorts of military historical references. I think Harper was invoking them because they were a matter of personal interest and they suit the culture of the Conservative Party. I think he's using them to remind people we're at war. Without saying we're at war, he's invoking wartime memes. He's invoking that sense we're under siege from what we thought was our closest partner. And if we're at war, we have to make tough choices and we're going to have to suffer sacrifices. That's the first thing. The second thing is he is trying to bring into sharp relief the difference between he and Poilievre, because they are not saying the same thing. And I think if you listen to what Carney had to say and then you listen to what Poilievre had to say on Thursday at the Canadian Club, man, oh man, oh man, they are explicitly offering different points of view. And I think there's a real choice there. And Carney wants to highlight that. He's trying to bring that conflict and that contrast in position into relief. He's saying Poilievre is indulging in nostalgia, and he wants to tell you that just once we get past Trump, it's going to go back to what it was. And it ain't. So don't fool yourself. And hope isn't a strategy. And if you base it on that. So, and Poilievre is saying with equal force, don't be a tit. Like, don't imagine that we can just walk away from a relationship of this scope and just rebuild it somewhere else. That's not realistic. They're both fighting for the head nod of the Canadian public as to what's politically realistic. And it's interesting. So I think Carney made an explicit decision that he wanted to accelerate that confrontation and to highlight that difference of opinion. And I suspect that's going to define our politics for the next 2 years into the next election, whenever it is. The third thing is he's preconditioning us. It's what Jordan says, and it's why he's dour. And it's why, David, he didn't try to use charm or equip or show any of that. He is trying to do what we have talked about for a little while, which is he's trying to set expectations. Because if that relationship is fundamentally altered, and if we have to come to grips with the fact that it might not return to where it was, then not only are we going to do the things we can to protect ourselves, but we're also going to suffer in this war of trade and economics with the United States. We're going to suffer some sacrifices, and that means that our standard of living, he's not coming out and saying it, but the implication is our standard of living might take a beating. And by the way, don't blame me, right? Blame Trump, blame the world, blame the situation in which we find ourselves, through which we are trying to battle. But he's definitely trying to dampen expectations. And yet we wake, and sure as shit, we wake up this morning, we find that inflation, as a consequence of Iran, has risen to 2.4%. Why? Because gas has risen 13% month over month. Why? Because of Trump and because of the war. And so I think the message was less canned, less familiar, less just paint by numbers than I originally thought listening to it. I think there's a real strategy there.
Okay. Well, speaking of real strategies, let's talk about let's close up on Poilievre's week. So, the messaging through much of the week was an attack on Carney's credentials. Whether or not his education and history actually qualified him, or whether he had made such bad decisions in those previous incarnations that they were disqualifying, seemed to be the Poilievre line. Gave a significant speech at the Canadian Club in Toronto to a relatively large audience, and then closed the week by going to the UFC event in Winnipeg, where it looked like he was greeted very warmly by the people in attendance, but appears to be the kind of event that got him where he's at, and got him the numbers that he has. None of that, certainly that last event, really made me curious about what they're doing. Eric Blais, a media marketing commentator from Quebec, suggested in the Toronto Star today that he's really playing to that between advertising, which they've got an advertising campaign on right now, spending about $1 million in the early stages of a majority government, UFC, Eric Blais suggests he's still fighting for his leadership, and that this is not about the public at all and building broader support. This is all about how he continues to secure the leadership. I only raise that because, I mean, he's got new people around him. They're smart people. I interviewed Steve Outhouse. He's an evidently smart guy who understands politics. And I think Poilievre is a smart guy who understands politics. I think Scheer's an idiot, but we can leave that aside. So they're doing these things for a reason. And I'm damned curious what that reason is. Anybody got an idea?
I think it's a mix. I do think it's securing his leadership in terms of going to those crowds and showing that he does have people who adore him, and pushing out. So anyone that is thinking of making a move is well aware that he is still strong with certain segments. At the same time, I think they are trying to figure out what message works and what's doing it. You know, he tried the strategy. He went on, did a lot of mainstream media. He was out there doing it, and his numbers kept getting worse. The divide is growing. So then maybe they're at that stage where they're like, well, wait a second. I was at my best when I was throwing very, very vicious punches against Trudeau. Maybe I'll get back to that. So I think they're trying to figure it out. I don't think they have figured it out. I don't think any of it's working right now. I do think they were on the right path by being more statesmanlike, and I think there's a path there. But it is, look, being a conservative in this country is incredibly hard to win elections. It is very narrow and rocky at the best of times. And now we have this existential threat. It's very, very challenging. And I don't think they've figured out what path they even want to go up right now.
So when George W. Bush was running against John Kerry, Karl Rove quite counterintuitively decided to attack John Kerry's military record. He was considered to be a military hero, right? Decided to attack his military record. And people were like, well, why would you attack him on his strongest point? And Rove was like, because if I take that from him, he has nothing. Right? If I can take that from him, he's finished. So that's the only rationale I can think of on the attack on Carney's credentials, Scott.
And maybe we'll have Oxford Canoeists for Truth out soon with an ad saying that Carney was a fraud this whole time.
Yeah.
Yes, I think it's probably a little late to swift boat Carney on his economic credentials. A little late in the game there, but I think that this ping ponging between the strategies that was sort of Poilievre's week last week epitomizes the challenge that he has. He needs to be able to speak in a more statesman-like way in order to lift the ceiling on his potential support among more mainstream voters. But he absolutely has to keep that, has to show that he can still motivate the base to keep them with him and to kind of try to quell some of that internal pressure that he's feeling. So you end up with seeing him really last week, actually alone, doing all of those things. And some of those things clearly work at cross purposes. And I think his concern now is far more internal than it is external. You have to imagine that after the defection of Marilyn Gladue, like now you're seeing defections from every part of the Conservative Party. These are not just red Tories that are leaving. These are people who are true social conservatives who are departing. So the pressure internally, I think, is much higher than it was 2 weeks ago. And so appearances at things like the UFC, that's to remind people that he still has that energy. He's still drawing crowds. He can still animate people. But that to me is more a message for caucus than anything else. I think that the Canadian Taxpayer Federation comment, that podcast, I'm actually less sure that that was strategic. To me, that looked like another example of putting him in a very partisan type of media where he is overly comfortable that led him to feel like he could make a comment like that. And then it gets taken out of that and put into a more mainstream universe. And it seems really crazy. I'm not sure that that is a strategy. I don't know that we're going to see them repeat that, because in order for it to work, in order for you to be able to swift boat somebody like that, like you need a whole ecosystem around that. You need money behind that. You need that to be part of something more cohesive. I'm not sure that's what we saw last week.
Well, they did double down on social media on it. It's not like they ran away from it. They put out some tweets on it, but I hear what you're saying. Scott, what's your take?
I think it is a strategy. I think it kind of reminds me of the guy who goes on a diet, and after 2 weeks, he says, Jesus Christ, this diet is bullshit. I haven't lost 20 pounds, so forget it. I'm back to potato chips and beer. And that's what I think is happening here. I think, he's pivoting away from the pivot. I think it's the re-pivot. And I, like you, tried to work through a rationale for why you would go after Carney on the basis of education, which got simplified to because it didn't lend itself to a calculation of, oh, well, he's not going to deliver on the things that he's promised. It's no, he's wrong in his calculation. And I invite you, listening audience, to recognize that this guy with his big goddamn diplomas and credentials and central bank governorships was wrong for the past 10 years, and I was right for the past 10 years on every single beat. That's what he was saying in the Canadian Club explicitly. And so I do think this is a strategy. I think it's a rejection of what they did for what struck me as a very short period of time, but I think they've already decided to abandon it. What do I think is going on? I think it's let Bartlett be Bartlett. I think it's let Poilievre be Poilievre. I think it is just knuckling under to his desire to be in the place that he prefers to be and be comfortable. And this ill-fitted suit of clothes they made him wear, where he was, going to do mainstream interviews and strike a different tone and all that, I think that they've already, to hell with that. And I think you see the departure of some staff that suggests that might have something to do with it. I think you see that, this probably has a lot to do with the gut punch that was losing the majority and the denial and the mule kicking they've been doing since then, where they continue to denounce it as though it doesn't exist. Rosie Barton literally confronting Andrew Scheer going, Christ, it sounds like you don't think the majority exists. If I drop this ball, does it hit the floor? Like, are we operating within the same, laws of physics here? And so I think it is an instinct that's dressed up as a strategy. I think there may be some rationale behind it which says, well, this is why this is wise. This is wise because, one, it's going to allow the leader in the caucus to get their mojo back, get their comfort and their confidence back. This also has the byproduct and benefit of demonstrating his strength and connection with the base, with certain segments of the population, with younger males. All of that sends a signal to people who've been watching and wondering after Monday night whether maybe he shouldn't run the next election, whether we should try to take a run at him internally, sends a signal and backs them up. That may all be true. I don't think that's the strategy. I think the strategy here is the leaders just sick and tired after 2 weeks of trying to be someone else. They ain't going to be someone else. Piss on that. I'm done with that. It hasn't gotten me anywhere. I'm just going to be who I be. And to me, the exclamation point on that sentence was going to UFC. That was, to me, a declaration of, I am not changing. I'm going to be who I'm going to be. More kettlebell. More kettlebell. Fuck you all. And that's what I think's going on. And we'll see how it works out. I mean, does that mean he can get 41 to 43% again? I doubt it. But I think they've decided that this whole repivot is a waste. This pivot was a waste of time, and they're on the repivot.
Fred, I'll let you about clean up on this. You got any closing words on Poilievre's week?
No, I think a lot of what Scott said I would agree with. I think that is where they're going, where he is. He's going to be back to himself more. The stuff we've seen, I think they've looked at it as a something to try, and it, in their mind, didn't work. I don't think they committed to it long enough or hard enough to see the results. I mean, we're looking at polling numbers way too much, but what's the result right now? Like, we're talking election years from now, and you've got to soften people up. You got to make changes in terms of perception. You can't do that overnight. It's going to take time, and you need to commit to it. But whatever direction he chooses, I hope go all in on it and stick to it. And we'll see what happens when we get to election night for the next parliament.
Yeah, time is a real paradox for him, I think, because they do have the time if they wanted to double down on the strategy of sort of positioning him to be more appealing to more moderate voters. They actually have the time to build that. But 2 months is not enough necessarily to see the fruits of that. And the fact that they're returning to this now tells me that that's all about the internal pressure.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's cauliflower.
So they have
it's
time.
cauliflower. I don't want to eat cauliflower. He doesn't want to do that.
Party theoretically has time, Jordan, but he just doesn't.
That's right. Yeah, he's fighting for his life there.
Right. Okay, Mr. Pinsent, can you bring these proceedings to a close, please?
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
Jordan, you got a Hey You for us?
I do. It's a riff on the gravy plane because I mean we unless we
Air Ford One,
unless we really maximize the.
This is the funniest story of the week by far.
It is like you couldn't wish for better material if you are in opposition in Ontario right now, and that's actually what my Hey You is about. So it's going out to the Ontario NDP. This is gold. You are being handed gold, but don't mistake it, because I think that there's been a lot, and there has been just a fire hose of examples that Ford is shitty. Ford is absurdly shitty. He is doing all of these things that are benefiting him and his buddies, and from the green belt to taking over, to the spa, to like all of those things are outrageous, absolutely. But just making the case that Ford is outrageous is a bit of a dead end. And that's just as likely to benefit the Liberals as it is to benefit the ONDP. So the case that I would like to make in my Hey You this week is I would love to see Mart and the ONDP grab onto these things and make very clear what the stakes are for voters when these choices are being made by the Ford government. And not just in like general affordability terms, but in like really specific terms that include some propositional stuff to show why they are the alternative to Ford, why they are the ones who can get the province back on the right track. Like when I saw the stupid plane announcement, do you know what my first thought was? I thought about my 4-year-old who's in a class with 27 other kids. She's in a class with 27 other kids. And the teacher is sending notes home because they've run out of Kleenex in January. Like, this is fucked up, you guys. This is really the stakes of these decisions for the Ford government when they are spending millions of dollars hiring their private consultants to manage school boards, and my kid's in a class with 2 adults and 27 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. Like, these are the stakes and some of the things that I think really have to be made clear in terms that connect with voters and that put forward some punchy propositional stuff in order to really fully capitalize on the gold that is being handed to opposition parties in Ontario right now. So yes, Ford is bad, but we got to do more than that. Got to really connect it up for voters. So that's my Hey You this week.
Excellent. There we go. Scott?
You know, the best, can I just add one last little thing on this crazy fun story? Kicking around in Toronto media and Toronto talk radio and all that kind of stuff I get to do a bit of. And last week, in the first stage of this, when there was a lot of pushback in his office, the way they were trying to work media with it was to point out how the King Air plane is so decrepit and so bad. Like they were pointing out, like the toilet doesn't work on it. It can barely, and the thing costs so much. And these were exactly the arguments that the Mulroney PMO used when they bought the quote unquote Taj Mahal. Remember all that, like, man, this thing, it's not even that nice. Like it looks like a camper van, and all this. It is just
sounds better than your average Ontario classroom.
You do that for a day, and then you sit down you open a bottle of beer and you go, this is not working, boss. Okay, I can tell you right now, complaining about the toilet on our plane is not turning this ship around for us. So,
all right, Fred. Sorry, Scott. Your Hey You.
Sure, my Hey You.
Yeah.
My Hey You goes out to Howard Lutnick, the Secretary of Commerce.
Oh, yeah.
Who decides to sits at a conference last week and makes headlines in the United States, particularly here in Canada, saying that Canada's approach sucks. That Canada sucks at the trade table, and and I would just say a couple of things. First of all, like, fuck this guy, right? Like, I'm so sick of this guy blowing up all the time. But remember, this was triggered by a report that one of Canada's most senior negotiators said, we can see that Trump's hand is weakening as time goes on. We're not even certain. Everyone's on our ass. Like, why aren't we like Mexico? Why aren't we getting a deal? Why aren't we moving down the track? And it was sort of like, well, I don't know. Like, maybe that's a problem, but maybe it isn't. Maybe we're content to kind of wait a little while longer as he gets closer to the midterms and gas is $77 a gallon. Maybe he's going to feel more politically vulnerable, and that advantages us. So Hutnick goes off. And I would just say the first thing is these guys always holler when they don't like the truth and when someone tells it to their face. So that's the first, it's a tell. As soon as they start screaming and calling you names, you know that you've actually found the truth and that they don't like it and it hurts. The second thing is Howard Lutnick is also, and it should not go unmentioned, he is motivated personally to carry this kind of heavy, vulgar line. He needs to Hegseth this issue up a little bit because his name in the aftermath of Nomi and Bondi has been circulated as maybe the next Treasury Secretary, that is due for a beheading, and that the Trump isn't. So he needs to get out there and Hegseth and show that he's fighting and all that sort of stuff. And of course, he's also dogged by the fact that he flat out lied about his relationship with Epstein. And God only knows if we'll ever see the rest of those files or what's in them, but I'm sure that he is not too anxious about that issue either. So, you know what? We see you, Lutnick, and we are not intimidated by your barking.
And by the way, Doug Ford gave him a good run for his money, but the Hegseth, Samuel L. Jackson, Quentin Tarantino quote is the funniest thing of the week by far.
Oh, for sure. Funniest thing of all time, these guys. Like, South Park does him so, it's not even a parody. It's just basically it's a description of him.
Some things are beyond parody. Fred, you got a Hey You?
I do. And my Hey You is for the pride of Merrifield, Saskatchewan, a local farmer by the name of Brock Lesnar. Last night at WrestleMania, after 2 decades of being the most dominant, feared disruptor in the business, Brock did something we rarely see from people at the top. He knew when to quit. He lost to a rookie opponent, and instead of demanding a recount or a rematch, he took off his boots and left them in the ring and walked out. And I'd say it's a lesson for anyone. You can spend years dominating the field and crushing your opponents, but there comes a day when the energy in the room shifts. And, I really, really commend people who have the self-awareness to see that the time is up and to have the grace to back out before they become a parody of themselves. Brock is going back to the farm with his legacy intact. And sometimes the best thing you can do is leave with your boots in the ring and move on with life.
Always thought there was a strong parallel between fighters and politicians and not knowing when to quit, and always fighting an extra one or two that are not worth it. Right? My hey you goes out to Charles Milliard and the provincial Liberal Party in Quebec, which, according to recent polls, has pulled into the lead ahead of the Parti Québécois, still behind in projected seat count, but having momentum. And the reason I bring this up is not because I'm a partisan, because I have nothing to do with the provincial Liberal Party that's not connected to federal Liberals and et cetera. I bring it up because so many people that I talk to tell me that the threat of separation in a referendum in Quebec and Alberta are seriously impeding investment in this country and seriously having international investors question whether they should be putting money here. And one of the pitches of Canada in this world where the United States is where it's at is as a stable place to invest. Rule of law, stable political system, all that kind of stuff. And investors look at a potential referendum in both places and they go, well, is it really stable? And so to the extent that these things can be taken off the table by a provincial Liberal win in Quebec and by Danielle Smith coming to her senses in Alberta, I think that our attempts to get more money in here and to build Canada faster will be more successful. So I'm watching the provincial Liberals with great glee and excitement, and I'm hoping that Alberta comes to its senses and we can take this disruption off the table that is impeding our economic recovery. So, hey, you provincial Liberals, go at it. That's our show for this week. I want to thank the three of you for being here. As always, Scott, we're without you next week because you are teaching.
Yes, I am. I'm contaminating younger minds.
You're back for your annual round at Queen's University. Geez, I think I'm dropping by one day next week. You better warn the kids about that.
Give a guest lecture on the 76 Habs, and people are looking forward to it.
one of my favorite teams. All right, I'd like to thank all of you accursed who watched or listened to the show today. I want to thank the sponsors who made it possible, and of course, Yuri Slavkovsky. See you next week with more Curse.